Thank you very much for being on the programme. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
So, Trump and Putin are negotiating over Ukraine. It feels a little bit like Europe's playing catch-up.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen in Paris?
Well, they aren't yet negotiating, but they say they're going to negotiate. So let's see what happens in Riyadh. But clearly what's happening here is that the Europeans are playing catch-up. They've been taken by surprise by the announcement of these negotiations and then, of course, by the tone of Vice President Vance's speech in Munich. They've been shocked by that. Although, frankly, they shouldn't have been surprised because the signals have been there for quite a while. And now they're now reacting. And not surprisingly, they want to be at the table in any negotiation. And what they're realising is that if you want to be at the table, you've got to put something on the table. And that's what this meeting in Paris is about, really. Hence the talk of increased defence spending. Hence Keir Starmer's suggestion that he's ready to put British troops on the ground if necessary. That's the reaction to the shock that they've had.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpick here, isn't there? But you say there about Keir Starmer hinting that he may be willing to put troops on the ground. And I'm just, I guess, trying to get my head around that. You know, are we really talking about a situation where British forces could be fighting against Russian forces?
No, what he's talking about is in a situation when there has been a negotiated settlement of some sort, and it's a decent one, which we have confidence in, putting some British forces in alongside others in order to provide reassurance for the future sort of maintenance of that agreement. But we're a long way away from that.
It's quite risky, that, right?
It's potentially very risky, and it would depend on the nature of the deal. It would also, in my view, depend on the Americans being prepared to underpin that deal themselves. So it's not just the British, but what he's indicating is that he wants to be part of this process. And I'm not surprised because, frankly, a lot of our interests are at stake here. This is about the security of Europe.
Yeah, you say they're about, you know, the Americans perhaps underpinning something, but it feels like, at least if you believe what Donald Trump is saying, that they're not that happy to do that.
Well, no, he has said that he's not going to put American troops on the ground, but there are all sorts of other things that the United States can do. After all, it's the United States that's negotiating the deal. The United States has a stake in that deal being good and being maintained. So I think they've got to uphold it.
What do you make of, you know, what Donald Trump has said so far? He's effectively saying, like, Europe needs to step up, you can't rely on America. Does that mean that we need to hug Europe a bit more tightly?
Well, something really important has happened, which is that the American security guarantee for Europe is less certain than it was before, and it's clearly more conditional than it was before, and we've got to react to that. Now, the issue for Britain is we're out of the EU, so we have some sort of tactical freedom in our foreign policy, but we've got to manage those two big relationships, one with America and one with Europe. And Keir Starmer is saying we can be a bridge between the two, but my concern is that that may not be the case because we don't really necessarily have enough purchase on either end of that bridge to be a really influential player. So we need to think about that very carefully, work out case by case where our interests lie and how we can manage the relationships. Not going to be easy, that.
What's your sense? What would you be advising?
Well, I would be advising that, you know, where we can take advantage, for example, of regulatory freedoms to advance the growth agenda, which is so important to this government, we should certainly consider doing that. But equally, our security interests are very closely aligned with those of other Europeans in the end, and that's going to be very important as well. So my question is, how do you hold those things in balance? That's going to be the challenge.
How seriously do you think we should be taking what Donald Trump has been saying? You mentioned J.D. Vance as well. How seriously do you think we should be taking it?
Well, we should take very seriously the fact that this is a different American administration that's going to conduct American affairs in a different way, based on power, economic power, military power and political power, not based on rules and principles, which is the way that we're used to running international affairs. We've got to adapt to that. We need to take that seriously. Now, equally, there is an element... I didn't, particularly appreciate the Vance speech. I thought it was pretty unpalatable in many ways, but there is an element of truth in the sense that we in Europe need to think about how we are dealing with the issues that are generating populist, anti-establishment movements in our countries. That is economic disadvantage, it's immigration. We can't just sweep them under the carpet. We've got to be able to respond to them.
What did you find unpalatable about his speech, then?
Well, I found very difficult the way that he was accusing European countries of not having freedom of speech, for example. He was more critical of his European allies than he was of Russia or China. And, of course, we are democracies and we do have open societies and we're proud of them. So that was the bit I found difficult to stomach.
a big part of this as well is defence spending.
Yeah.
Do we need to spend more on defence?
We do. We've known that for a long time. We've talked about it. It's really difficult because of the other pressures on the government spending, and Rachel Reeves was always very concerned about that. But again, my point is, you've got to get to the table, you've got to deserve to be there, and that is why there's so much talk of increasing European defence spending, and we're going to have to do it. We have to be able to stand up for ourselves collectively. That means more spending and better coordination.
Yeah, that's it though, better spending, isn't it? Because it feels to me like an awful lot of people talk about more spending, but there's not much on what we're going to spend it on. You know, it reminds me a bit about the NHS debate, right? You know, where we're talking about spending more on the NHS without a conversation about how we're spending the money. So it feels like you kind of chuck it into a bottomless pit.
Well, there's a long history of sort of procurement issues in the British defence spending, for example. There are rivalries between the different services. But then if you look across Europe, you have things like 2 separate future fighter jet programmes, one being led by the British and Italians, the other by the French and the Germans. Can we really afford that sort of luxury now? Surely we've got to align more closely on the production of major programmes for our defence industry.
That's interesting. I mean, there has often been talk, and I know this is going further than what you're saying, of like, you know, a European army. Yeah. I guess you'd stop short of that, would you?
Well, I don't think we need a European army, but we need better coordination of European armies and also European defence industry. And one of the issues for Britain is how much of that's going to be done within the European Union and what role are we going to have in all that? That's very important for us to get right.
And what do you think, how do we get that right?
Well, I think we need to talk, we need to be on the front foot there and be coordinating with other Europeans. But of course, also, we have an important defence relationship with the United States, and there's value in maintaining that as well.
You see, and you touched on this about, you know, the difficulty for the Chancellor, because, you know, we're in a situation where we spend more on debt interest than we do on schools, where councils are going bust, where rape victims are waiting years for justice because of a backlog in the courts. You know, a lot of people will be thinking, do we have to accept that we just can't spend the money on defence that we'd like to?
Well, that is a real problem for the government because, of course, if they don't improve the National Health Service and all the things, the commitments they made, then they're going to find themselves in a difficult position in the next election. My point is that we really haven't had the debate in the country that we need to have about the security situation and how it's changing around us. We're a long way off having an honest debate about that. We've got to get into these trade-offs in a more serious way. That's a real problem for the government, really difficult. But you see Keir Starmer moving in that direction now, and I think it's necessary.
What kind of level of defence spending do you think is the right one?
Well,
Trump said 5% of GDP.
Trump said 5%, but America doesn't spend 5%. I think that clearly we've committed to 2.5 without putting a timeline on it. We need to move in that direction rapidly.
So we need a timeline as well.
And we need to make things happen as opposed to just talk about them. But I go back to the earlier point that you and I have both made, which is it's not just the number, it's what you spend it on, how efficiently you spend it, and how you coordinate that for effect on the ground with your allies.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.